Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome everyone to our webinar called When Food Becomes Immaterial, Confronting the Digital Age. It is a webinar where we will be discussing around the topics and issues addressed in the 2018 issue of the Right to Food and Nutrition Watch. It is the first time we have a webinar around the topic of this publication, so we're really excited. My name is Alejandra Morena, and I am the editor of the Right to Food and Nutrition Watch, and I'm also Central America coordinator at FIAN International. We're very pleased also to have three fantastic speakers today. We have Pat Mooney, who is, just a second, please, sorry. Yeah. We have Pat Mooney, who is the co-founder of Etc. Group and also the laureate of the Alternative Nobel Prize. We have Stefano Prado, the Executive Director of Society for International Development, SID. He's also editor of the journal Development, and he's a member of the editorial board of the Right to Food and Nutrition Watch. And we have also Fabio Pita, who is researcher at the University of Sao Paulo and the Network for Social Justice and Human Rights. Both Stefano and Fabio have also contributed as authors to this year's issue of the Watch, and Etc. Group has also collaborated with an article. So all of them are very much involved in this year's issue, and we're very excited about that. As I mentioned before, this will be recorded. We will first have a short introduction from my side on the publication. Then Stefano will talk about the issue of this year, its relevance, and why we thought this was an important topic. And then we will pass the floor to Pat and Fabio. If you can please unmute yourselves. We are hearing a bit of background noise. Maybe it is from some of the co-organizers, the speakers. Okay, it is solved now. Yes, and sorry, I was saying in the order, we will have first Stefano, then we will have Pat and Fabio, but it's really important for us today that we have an interactive debate, that we have a lively discussion. So we're gonna have sufficient time for questions and comments from your side. As we said at the beginning, we can explain again when we open the floor, again, how to interact with us technically, very briefly. Yes, but then let's just go for it. Let's start. I just wanted to share with those of you, for those of you who are not so familiar with the publication, the Right to Food and Nutrition Watch, a couple of points around it. And here, sorry, I need to close a bit here, yeah. So basically, this publication was launched for the first time in 2008 in the wake or amidst the major world food price crisis of 2008, which is also not by chance. It is published by FIAN International and Bread for the World. But behind this, this huge effort, we have around 40 civil society organizations and social movements that are organized in the Global Network for the Right to Food and Nutrition. It is a peer-reviewed publication on issues, developments, processes around the right to food and nutrition. And it is, for us, it is important to know that it is the expression of a collective process of reflection for action. This sounds complicated, but the idea is that there's a lot of people behind it. It is this collective effort. And we have this goal of contributing to for a radical transformation of food systems so that the right to food and nutrition of all people can be realized. And what we're trying to do also with this publication is to connect different groups. We have we involve in different ways different people. It is a publication that is open to those most affected by hunger, oppression, malnutrition, and their organizations and their organized movements. And also it is seeking to connect all those people within food systems, but also to create a dialogue between them and other groups such as researchers, academics, human rights experts, and policymakers. So we're really dealing with a very diverse types of peoples who are contributing to this publication. And we're also trying to have this publication as a tool that can help for alternative and critical knowledge co-construction that is departing from the experience, from the lived experience of the peoples and struggles. We don't think that construction knowledge is knowledge construction, sorry, is something that is only there done in academia or in labs, or scientists should be doing that. We think there's a lot of knowledge, of course, with all those groups, and we want to create this dialogue. So these are just a couple of comments on the publication. I'm happy to share more later on. Just to finish, to mention that over the past now 11 years, we have had almost 260 authors that come from all these different groups, from social movements, from civil society, academics, human rights experts, and others. And we have also covered the situation around the right to food and nutrition in more than 60 countries and territories. The publication is available in Spanish, English, French, and since a couple of years in Portuguese, sometimes some articles in Italian, in Arabic, and so on. German as well, we have had translated, but the whole issue is only in those 4 languages. And as I mentioned, that the first issue was published in 2000. It means last year we had a 10th anniversary. So we embarked upon a strategic rethinking process. And actually, the 2018 issue is the first time the results of those reflections are seen. This has affected the publication in different ways, including the new revamped format, but also we have decided, we thought it was really important to create complementary or additional tools, such as the supplement that will come out this year for the first time, that is basically a shorter version of the publication with a more accessible language, with a lot of infographics and images. And this way we try to reach different audiences. On the one hand, more the policymakers, academics, researchers, some sectors of civil society, and also with the other tool, with this supplement that is more visual, that is shorter, that is more accessible, trying to reach also social movements, grassroots organizations, and so on. So this was just a couple of words in the publication. I don't want to take any more time. I will now give the floor to our first speaker, Stefano Prado. I will have to unmute your microphone, Stefano, just a second. Okay, Stefano, if you would like to unmute yourself now, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Alejandra, for the introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are located. So I think I have the honor here of opening the dances. I'll just speak with a few introductory comments, because I'm sure you want to hear from our colleagues Pat and Fabio more extensively. So this year watch is a bit of a different one, not only because of what Alejandra has just explained in terms of the changes in the format, concept, and layout, but also because he wants to step beyond its traditional conversations to some extent. So this year's approach by the editorial board was to try and explore some of the impacts of some features of what we can refer to as the dominant version of modernities and their dynamics have on food systems. And in particular, explore processes of dematerialization, digitalization, and financialization, as they are deeply changing traded on the markets since centuries is not new, but there's something that is changing in the way in which the process of commodification is advancing, and therefore we wanted to try to analyze and expose these different dynamics. And when we do so, we might be somehow improper, because it is not often easy to separate between what we can relate to as dematerialization, what we relate to as digitalization and financialization. They are really, in some respect, aspects, sides of the same coin, and very often deeply entrenched one in the other. But let us try for a minute as an introduction, and with all maybe impositions of the case, just to try and clarify what we speak about and what is then articulated more thoroughly throughout the watch. So by process of dematerialization, we refer to the actual decrease in the physical substance of food and the increase of the market value of its immaterial dimensions. What do we mean by that? First of all, it's the fact that when we actually purchase industrial food in the food markets, only a share and a progressively smaller share of the price actually is related to its physical substance. But there is a growth of a number of immaterial dimensions that contribute to defining its price: transport, logistic, distribution, marketing, and so forth. So in the price of food, in the price that the corporate food system commercializes on the market, a good share that actually does not relate to its physical substance, but actually this physical substance value share has been decreasing. The other aspect is the fact that there's a number of new elements of fashion and taste, where very often aggressive marketing, new fashionable eating habits are generating somehow an immaterial notion of food, which tends to be unrelated to its physical qualities. So you have a number of products, for instance, egg-like products that do not actually contain egg, or there are a number of ill-defined health concerns that may push somehow people to buy certain products because they think they're buying within it certain health qualities or certain particular dimensions that in fact are not there. So the first dimension is that in what is being marketed increasingly by the corporate food system, these immaterial dimensions, no matter how much you consider them, become much bigger in some respect than the actual physical qualities and the physical substance of the food that is traded. And that's one dimension of the equation. The second dimension of the equation has to do with the digitalization of food, where we refer to the increasingly automated, delocalized, and informatized process of production and commercialization. And this, of course, starts with the digitalization of seeds, but it also the digitalization of actual production, in which it is actually now completely possible to have extreme delocalization, in which you have automated agricultural activities which are remote controlled through robotic solutions, and this is already happening. It's in greenhouse automation in Southeast Asia, for instance. So you actually have a completely system of production which is completely free of human labor and is completely robotized. But there's also increasingly a new way of also marketing food, which is changing the nature of the marketplace, not only through what we have already explored as the sort of supermarket revolution, but increasingly with targeted automated e-commerce solutions, in which it's even possible for consumers to actually reorder food by devices which are included into kitchen appliances, or by simply scanning a barcode with their mobile devices, and other situations like this. So you move into a situation in which there is complete delocalization, not only of production, but also of the actual purchasing act. And lastly, the issue of financialization. And I think by financialization, we both refer to the, well, overall is the increased importance of financial markets within food systems. But this plays out fundamentally at two levels. The first one is by increasing the number of financial products which are linked to food commodities. And very often these are really the equivalent of modern betting, modern gambling to some extent. And this has profoundly changed the nature of, food prices, and up to the point where their volatility is very often much more considered, much more related to financial markets and derivatives than to actual real economy, shortage of excess of supply. But the second dimension is also related to the fact that increasingly there is a financialization of some of the means of production, typically particularly land, for which its acquisition is therefore the acquisition of an asset class of financial products, which is not necessarily linked to its actual use for production. And this has, of course, generated decisions vis-a-vis the grabbing of land or the acquisition of land and other resources at a much, much upstream level of the production, and very distant from the actual concerns of who wants to use resources for the production of food. So what is the combined effect of all of these processes of dematerialization, digitalization, and financialization? Well, first of all is distance. They generate a lot of distance between the actors of the food system. And in this distance, there's a growth of a new class of intermediary which populate the system, and in which, increasingly economic proceeds are captured. And this also leads to a process of atomization, sorry if I pronounce it correctly, of consumers, and their understanding really of single individuals with purchasing power, far away from the notion of a citizen who's actually holding rights and is closely connected to a social tissue. So it's a process that maximizes distance and maximizes delocalization. The second dimension of these, it invisibilizes production in front of who actually consumes food, because of that distance and because of that disconnect. And therefore production becomes invisible, and so invisible become food producers within it. And thirdly, is that this generates a whole new set of drivers of inequalities. I mean, the inequalities are no longer confined in the tension between within production, whether within labor and within the owner of physical means of production, or within different scale of producers. It's actually far away with actors which owe physical financial capital rather than physical capital, and even more that control information. So the dynamics of concentration of wealth and income are moving far away from the real economy where people live, produce, and struggle for the different aspects of life, into that dematerialized world of finance and information. And lastly, all of these, because it transcends boundaries and national boundaries and regional boundaries easily, and can move very quickly across different also legal boundaries that can be established, becomes very difficult to trace from a point of view of democratic accountability. So it's fundamentally a democratic accountability challenge as well. So in a nutshell, we wanted with this right to food to expose, put on the table some of these dynamics, provide an opportunity to discuss and debate them, and of course, understand that unless we really understand how to cope with them, or our struggle for food sovereignty and our struggle for rights becomes completely anchored to a world that maybe is shifting away into new dimensions. So we need to somehow understand these dynamics, because we need to reframe our concept of struggle and our strategies for the struggle, and completely rethink also spaces and modalities of engagement into the process. So I think I'll stop here because my time is up, and I will give the floor back to Alejandra, and of course looking forward to hear as well from Fabio and for Path more extensively. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefano, for this great summary of this very comprehensive issue of the watch. I would suggest that we open the floor for any concrete comments or questions you may have, but we will keep this session short because we want to have at the end more the debate after the other two speakers have intervened as well. So I'm going to check briefly here, and maybe to remind you, you have two ways of interacting with us. You can raise the little hand by clicking on this little symbol with a hand, and then we can unmute your microphone and you can speak, or you can write on the chat. I did want to mention before briefly that, of course, we're extremely excited to have these three speakers. Originally, we did have also two fellow female speakers, but there was a little change, just to mention that we had considered the issue of gender balance when preparing this webinar, just as a little, since it comes up often, this topic of. Okay, so I'm checking here the questions. I don't see them right now. Just a second. Oops. Okay. Dilemma.
Sorry, maybe I can help. This is Wilma. I just see one question so far, which is more on the technical side, if there's a way to get on the network's email list. I don't see content questions in the chat yet.
Oh, thank you, Wilma. I actually lost the chat right now, so I'm sorry about that. Okay, then that's fine. We can right away pass the floor to our next speaker, Pat Mooney from etc. Group, etc. Group. Sorry.
You can speak now.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm hoping you can hear me. We made a choice here of me making an intelligent presentation or demonstrating to you the dangers of digital dematerialization through the system we're using. It's a bit complicated. Can you hear me okay?
Pat, we can hear you with a little tiny bit of echo, so it would be really important that you speak as slowly and as loudly and as clearly as possible.
I'm genetically incapable of speaking slowly, but I'll do my best. Let me try to describe what I think of as being 6 major changes caused by this new dematerialization, new digital or big data approach to agriculture that we are faced with. And I'll try to give examples of what I mean by each of these 6, I think, very huge changes in our food system because of digital technologies. The first one is scale. With the command of data and the command of surveillance technologies that are provided through digitization, scale is really no longer important to the companies. They can work on a small scale or on a very large scale. They're not concerned about whether or not there's 100 fields of 1 hectare each out there, or 1 field of 1,000 hectares, or anything else. It's simply a matter of adapting algorithms and to address the changing slopes and soils and so on conditions that they have already in their memory banks. So scale is no longer a factor, which means that for present agriculture around the world, which has been out of reach in a sense to big systems, to big agribusiness, they are no longer out of reach. It's not even just a matter of occupying their land or concentrating the control of the land in a formal sense. It means that they actually believe that they can manage their land even on very small scales with a great deal of diversity in the land. That's being shown now, for example, in Japan, where we have drone technologies spraying about 1/3 of the rice crop of Japan, and they're doing it in very small plots, and they're adjusting the spraying to the conditions of each plot, each individual plot. So that scale is not a threat. We see now in Germany companies doing research on farm machinery companies like Haus and Wendt doing research on decentralized tractor systems or farm machinery systems, where it's possible to change from sowing 10 rows or 20 rows of a crop at one time to breaking that down to planting 2 rows of a crop, or going up to 100 rows of a crop. They simply join or break apart the robots that are in the machine to adjust to the scale that is required. So that fact that no longer is land size a big concern, and that's land size is only one example of scale, is really different. A second change of the 6 that I want to list for you is diversity. It's also possible for, and it's being done, BASF, for example, a major German chemical company, but is also working with technologies that allow it to work with the machinery companies to plant perhaps soybeans in one row and maize in another row at the same time, to plant a diversity of different species in the same field, and to go back and harvest that diversity differently in the same field. So there, in a sense, we could say that this could be considered a good thing, in that it does make it possible to have more diversity in the field, but that diversity will, I'm sure, fluctuate between basically maize and soybeans, and not much else, like canola and sugar beet or something. It won't be very diverse, but they can do that. And that's an interesting thing that they're able to make those kinds of adjustments. And again, it's a different kind of threat, I think, to present production. The third difference, because of the digital technologies and the machinery they control and so on, is that the scope is different. It's now possible for enterprises that are in entirely different fields of the economy to reach into the food system and take control of parts of the food system where we never would have expected them to be around. We're used to talking about Cargill and talking about Monsanto, the good old days of Monsanto before this fire. We're talking about Carrefour or Walmart. But now, in the last few years, because of the command of digital technologies, we have companies like Amazon and Google and Alibaba and Tencent in China, all moving into the food system. And they're moving into it in quite remarkable ways and for even different reasons, but it is their control of data that has them moving into it. So Amazon buys Whole Foods, the world's U.S. largest organic food company, a standard grocery store company. They move into that because it gets them closer to the consumer. If they can get the consumer to come to them regularly to buy things, then they can have the consumer buy other things. So not just food, but clothing and pharmaceuticals and other products as well. So Amazon is moving massively into the food system, both in terms of delivery, but also in terms of retail outlets. because it gets them closer to the consumer, and they're doing that not just in the United States, but also in New Zealand, Australia, and China as well. We see the same thing with a company like Google working with Alibaba, where you would expect that perhaps their big data would help them, again, deliver food more effectively, and they are doing that. It's a big part of their activity. But they're also giving advice. They're going to farmers in China. Google is going to farmers in China, and they're advising them on markets, and they're advising them as well on inputs and how to improve the yield from pigs. And that's directly from a company like Google that, other than being rather greedy, doesn't know anything about pigs, you think. So scale or scope, pardon me, is a big factor. We don't know where the changes will come from next. We don't know who else will move into this. Earlier this year, Ford launched its first driverless vehicle just as a demonstration, and the driverless vehicle was delivering distance. So where will they be next? Uber, the taxi company or non-taxi company, the biggest and fastest growing part of this industry is in fact in food delivery. So where will they segue into? What will be their next move? You can't be sure. Another major change is of course, is who controls all of this. The control is not so visible any longer because of blockchains and because of digital currencies, cryptocurrencies, or more accurately could be called kleptocurrencies. Who actually has got their hands on the wheel, who's actually making the decisions, can be quite uncertain. It's a long distance relationship, and it's one which, again, removes the farmer from the equation in many ways, and even the consumer from the equation in a different kind of way. So the control is an important factor. The fifth factor, and it's extraordinarily important, is that it changes how we view life. Because it's not just digital DNA or digital information, data. It is the ability to maneuver the A, C, G's, and T's of the double helix, the base pairs of life, to treat that as a computer product, to upload it and download it from clouds, to create new diversity or destroy diversity by doing that. The digitization of life itself is part of the equation, as is the digitization of consumer data or weather information and so on. That all changes. And that's I think, really shocking that the ones and zeros are the same as the A, C, G's, and T's of DNA, basically. And companies who can manage the ones and the zeros of computer software can manage the A, C, G's, and T's of life itself. The last major change, which relates back to control as well, is risk or vulnerability in the food system. This highly diverse, in a way, but highly controlled new system of digital information does give a remarkable amount of risk in the system that we haven't had before. Once we establish it, we don't know how it's going to work. And I guess let me give some examples of that. Because we can become enthralled by the potential of the system to do certain things, but its failures are more worrisome, more enthralling, I suppose, in a way. For example, this year we've seen Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC. They were able to shoot a bucket of chicken into space, and they showed their command of technologies and of course their advertising chutzpah by blowing a bucket of chicken in space. But they couldn't actually deliver chicken to their stores in the UK. They got lost. The delivery system failed, and they had to close down hundreds of stores for several days as they fixed the system. Same was true for McDonald's. McDonald's claims that they can track their products everywhere in the world, and they know exactly what everybody is eating, and they have massive data to control and understand that. But they forgot to deliver potatoes to Japan. So there are no French fries in Japan. It was probably the first time many people in Japan actually discovered that French fries are potatoes. They disappeared. It's possible for Cargill, and Cargill does this, to listen to the sound of tuna eating and nourishing in the Pacific Ocean, and link that to commodity markets and the price of tuna and the price of fish feed around the world, and that connects to ground nuts in West Africa and to anchovies in Chile, but Cargill still loses track of where these things are and still can't sometimes find the technology what they thought they had, and suddenly in the Chicago marketplace, orders go missing. It's possible for a company like Tesco to advertise that, Tesco is the biggest food retailer in the UK, and is now linking with Carrefour, which is the second largest food retailer in the world, in France. But Tesco claims that it can track its products in the grocery shelves right back to the individual farmer, and even show pictures of the farm that the products come from. But Tesco still wasn't able to discover that the tomatoes that it was getting were being harvested in Italy by African migrant workers who were sometimes hungry and were virtually enslaved, or recognized that even in the packaging sector for the same tomatoes in the UK, that the workers, again, migrant workers from Romania, had to be kept inside barbed wire fences with dogs patrolling at night to make sure they didn't escape. Yet they claimed that they could still show you the picture of the farm where the tomatoes first came from. And there's many sad examples of that sort of failure in the system. The BASF, again, claims that they can track pests and diseases in the field and in real time using sort of Facebook technologies to identify what pests and diseases are coming. So does, by the way, Monsanto claim the same thing as BASF, that they're able to monitor these pests and diseases in real time and might recommend real changes. But Monsanto forgot about a couple of major maize crop diseases in the southern United States a couple of years ago, didn't plan for them at all, and farmers lost much of their crops. So again, when the technology, digital technologies can seem to be extraordinarily effective and powerful, it doesn't ultimately come down to that being safe for the food system. It's really not safe for the peasants who are growing most of the food around the world. In fact, it imposes a whole new level of danger. It fundamentally changes the structure of the food system. If I go back to the control part just for a moment. The links in the food chain now, because of the new technologies, are coming together. We don't have the same linkages we used to have. The mergers of the seed and pesticide companies over the last couple of years have shown us that really there's now, in the mind of the industry, not in the mind of farmers, but in the mind of the industry, there's really just one sector, which is agricultural inputs. But what we are seeing beyond those kinds of mergers, the mergers of the Bayers, the BASFs, and the Syngentas and so on down DuPont, is that control is moving to the farm machinery companies. Farm machinery companies now, because of their control of data, have more data than anybody else at the production end. They have John Deere, for example, the world's largest farm machinery company, has since early 2000s been combining information about weather, information about markets, with their on-the-ground information of what's happening in the field. They have the box that farmers use, industrial farmers use, to put in their seeds, their pesticides, their fertilizers, their water at the beginning of the growing season and throughout the growing season. That box, and so that box with the sensors is monitoring literally centimeter by centimeter what's going into the field. And John Deere has the same box at the end of the growing season that harvests that crop. So they know centimeter by centimeter again what's coming out of the field. And having that control means that they can actually have command over seeds, pesticides, and fertilizers, and they can have control over crop insurance as well, because they know more about the security of that crop and what's going to happen in the marketplace than anybody else. It also means that John Deere threatens companies like Cargill or Dreyfus or Mooney or Archer Daniels Midland, the big grain trading companies, because the grain traders no longer have a monopoly over the marketplace information or weather information. That's now being held more easily by the farm machinery companies, more accurately by farm machinery companies. And again, at the far end of the food chain, at the processor and retailer, and the new technologies are again allowing for more control over supply lines, more diversification over supply lines. So in the sector group, for example, we're deeply worried about what's happening with what we call gene drive technologies. CRISPR-Cas9 is the famous word that everybody uses, but it's again a digital ability to manipulate the A, C, G's, and T's of DNA to create changes in livestock or in crops that could make massive differences in what we finally eat or how we get through the food system. Very rapid and sometimes quite dangerous transformations that wipe out diversity, in fact. But while they have that capacity to manipulate DNA, the processors also are giving themselves new options. They can, for example, look at two choices for growing vanilla. They can choose to buy vanilla from peasants in Madagascar and sell it in the world marketplace, or they can choose to grow vanilla through digital technologies and digital use of genomics in a vat in Switzerland. So they remove it from the factory and they from the field and put it into the factory. And if the price fluctuates in an awkward kind of way that the company doesn't like, then you can choose to say, okay, we're going to forget about getting it from the field. We're going to get it from the factory this year instead. And as the prices drop for the factory production, that becomes easier to use. So they have a new tool. And that tool can apply to about 250 different food crops. These are mainly flavor and fragrance ingredients. 90% of them come from within 10 degrees of the equator. They're tropical crops. They're grown by smallholder producers, millions of smallholder producers around the world. And those crops are all susceptible now to being produced in factories instead of in the field. And again, at least giving an option to the processor and retailers to where they want to source their products. And it's for them to push the buttons and click the things that they need to do to make that transformation. So these are all of the changes. And I haven't even talked about blockchains in the sense of commanding land or cryptocurrencies being used that's in Peru and Brazil, or cryptocurrencies being used in wheat farmers in Ukraine. Or in refugee camps in Syria or in Jordan to control food supplies. Those are there as well. They have their own uncertainties and threats attached to them. But the technologies I'm describing also do use blockchain. They're also part of that. Last week we were told that there's a new initiative by the Earth Bank of Codes to digitize all of the biological diversity of the Amazon. That's part of a wider effort they're engaged in, the Earth Bank of Codes, to digitize the biodiversity of the entire planet. But they're starting with the Amazon, and they expect they will get it done in only a few years. When that's done, they will have it all stored on the cloud. The DNA will be there. They will get access to it through blockchains. And if someone profits from it, they claim that they will pay them, or they will have the access and benefit sharing arrangements made through cryptocurrencies. So that's also underway, and we do see the companies extensively now following these blockchains. Walmart, for example, has 30 products that they source from farms in South America, which they say they can trace right from the farm directly through on the blockchain to retail outlets in the United States or China, for that matter. So those are the 6 areas that I thought were important to highlight. I can give more examples of those things. They're real, they're underway, the risks are most real of all, and their control is extraordinarily dangerous as we see us moving from oligopolies around the world in the food system to basically duopolies, where there's really just a couple of companies that are going to finally dominate sectors of the food system. Can I leave it at that now? And I hope you could hear me. And I'll be glad to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Pat, for this fantastic intervention where you were trying to summarize these 6 main ways in which the changes that you see in food systems. While you were speaking, we did receive several comments that people couldn't hear you very well, unfortunately. This is where the technology failed us a little bit. But perhaps people were asking for a summary. I don't know, for example, if Stefano or Fabio would like to do such summary, if they feel in a position to do so. Otherwise, I'm sure there's a lot of materials that we can share after the presentation, after the webinar, also as a follow-up. And of course, in the article that they contributed to the watch, they address most of these issues. This is because there were several questions on this. If people can get something in written or an oral summary because of the sound quality. We're doing quite well with time, but we also want to give Fabio sufficient time. So just to check briefly, how do they feel? Stefano and Fabio, if you would feel like giving a short summary of what Pat presented, or perhaps we move on to Fabio and we have time in the debate towards the end to recap some of the points that Pat was raising. And just give me a second to unmute you. No, sorry. Where is this? Here. Okay, I have unmuted Stefano and Fabio in case you want to comment or compliment. I think Stefano has, and you still need to unmute yourself to speak. No, sorry. No.
Okay, hello to all. It was not easy to understand everything for me also, so it would be difficult to make a summary. Sorry for that.
Okay, let's see, Stefano, if you feel comfortable. You would need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, Alejandra, I was writing to you in the chat, but possibly you're not seeing it. So I also suggest we move on with we hear from Fabio, and I think we can pick things into the conversation later.
Okay, great. Since Fabio has a presentation, I will just give me a second so that he can share his screen. Okay, Fabio, you should be able in a second to share your screen so that we can see what you wanted to show us. And just to remind those who are coming a bit later, Fabio Pita, he's researcher with the University of Sao Paulo and also with his Network for Social Justice and Human Rights in Brazil. And he is an author, contributor to the Watch this year. They were writing on the issue of financialization on land and also looking at a specific case, Matopiba case in Brazil that is affecting the access to land of indigenous peoples. So yeah, Fabio, you have the floor for about 15 minutes if possible, so that we have time to discuss at the end, 15-20 minutes at most.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, although we are talking about difficult issues and somehow tragic issues. I'm going to make a speech concentrated in a concrete case in the north and northeast from Brazil. This region is called Matopiba region. It's the acronym of the states of Maranhão, Tocantins, Piauí, and they are located here. You can see the map in the northeast of Brazil, and they are in a cerrado area. The cerrado is a savanna-like region in Brazil, and this region is being, on the last years, the target of some sort of financial investment in soybean expansion and also in land as a financial asset. I will try to explain a little bit more about that. And the interesting point here for me is that I can somehow, with this concrete case, exemplify and bring a new concrete example for what Stefano and Patti talked before myself. Yeah, we've been researching this with FIAN for the last 4 or 5 years. Yeah, and what we discovered was that huge financial investors, including some pension funds from the USA and Europe, including pension funds from Germany, they are, and also investment funds, they are buying land to invest on the price of land and to earn with the difference between the price they buy that land and the price they sell it. It's very new. Yeah, it's a worldwide phenomenon. And it happens also in Australia, in the USA, in Europe, in Romania, for example, the same investors. And I'm going to try to bring you somehow a concrete example about this. It has a lot to do with the theme of financialization and digitalization, and also dematerialization of food systems, of course, because some of these lands, they are being sold, bought and sold, sometimes deforested and sometimes not. Yeah. So this is how it looks like. There you can see a high plateau in the front of the picture and what they call lowlands. Yeah, and this geomorphological system here is called cerrado in Brazil. It is very important for water resources and for biodiversity, of course, in Brazil. And these high plateaus and these lowlands are and were historically occupied by communities that used this land as commons. So they should have the tenure rights to these lands, but this process of financialization of food, agriculture, and land is evicting and expropriating these peoples from their lands. Yeah. So here, the high plateaus are being occupied with soybean production in the last 20 years, but after 2002, it increased a lot. Soybean production there expanded a lot because they are very good for mechanized soybean production with all the technologies we were talking about before. Yeah, with GPS and with drones and all the new technologies, seeds genetically modified, and very, how can I say that, very low wage labor being used on this sort of production. Yeah, so only for us to take a look on it. On the right, we can see the Cerrado forest, not deforested yet, and on the left we can see a soybean production there. These are communities on the lowlands. The communities they have been evicted from the high plateaus where this Cerrado areas were fundamental for their livelihood, where they could raise cattle, they could collect fruits, they could hunt, they could collect medicine, and they don't have access to it at all. These lands are being grabbed illegally, and they are being expropriated from these lands, even in the lowlands that happen nowadays. Now they are somehow constricted to these lowland areas. They also try to leave it, but they don't find, of course, wage labor anymore for them to be able to survive. And these lands where they are now somehow constricted are not enough or sufficient for them to survive. Yeah, irrigated soybean production. And only to mention some of the enterprises that are in northeast of Brazil, investing in land as financial assets. There is this very significant one called Radar, because it's a joint venture between a pension fund from the USA, the teachers insurance pension fund in the USA, in a joint venture with the biggest Brazilian sugarcane producer, Cosan, yeah, and they were buying and are buying land in Maranhão and Piauí area, for example. And it's important to mention that Cosan just sold their shares of Radar to TIAA. They kept only 3% of the enterprise because they appear for the Brazilian law as the managers of the enterprise, and TIAA only appears as the investors. So they somehow are not caught by Brazilians' laws that limits foreigners' ownership of the land. Yeah, so somehow the financial scheme allows huge funds to invest in land as this financial asset. Yeah? Only to try to explain very briefly what I'm calling a financial asset. That land can be this example. Yeah, it's only to buy one asset. Yeah, land in a very cheap price. Wait for the price to grow higher and sell it and earn profits or rent through this financial mechanism. Yeah, so it has a lot to do with what we would call speculation, and it seems how stock markets also function. Yeah, so it's widespread for commodities production and for land also nowadays. I'm not going to go through all the slides, but I would like only to choose some of them here to talk to you. This how to explain historically this process that I'm trying to show through this specific case, but it's that's widespread. Yeah, commodities markets functioning also as an asset started to have their prices higher and higher in the beginning of the 21st century. Yeah, we can take a look at it at this graph. I'm not going to explore data, only for you to take a look at it. Yeah, so the prices start to grow and to go higher in the beginning of the 21st century, and it has a lot to do with the way that financial capital works nowadays. Okay, this growth started just before the burst of NASDAQ, of the so-called .com bubble in the US in 2001. After that, huge investors they changed the investments into commodity markets, so-called futures markets, where the prices of the commodities are negotiated, like commodities like sugar, soybean, corn, iron, oil, of course. Yeah, and lots of times they are not even negotiating the commodity physically on itself. They are only betting on the prices of the commodities. So the two main investments at that moment, after 2001 were real estate markets in the US, in England, and in Spain, and commodities futures markets. Yeah, that happened with the commodities prices as a whole, but with soybean prices also, the trend is the same. And after 2008, we have this huge drop after financial crisis of 2008. Then the prices start to climb again, and they start to fall again until nowadays. Yeah. So what happens with soybean expansion? They followed the trend of the prices. Yeah. So I'm not going to enter on all these data. Okay. The production increased a lot since the beginning of it, 2002 mainly. Then the area also grew a lot. Okay, and productivity yield also increased a lot. This is in Brazil. Okay. What's important to understand here is that after the prices start to fall, production also start to fall, but area doesn't. Yeah. So here is the path that soybean expansion followed in Brazil. So it achieves this so-called Mato Piba region here. Yeah. And the core point of the argument here for us to grasp land as a financial asset is to understand that even after the prices of the commodities started to fall, land prices didn't. So somehow, if we were talking that commodity prices on the so-called secondary markets, derivative markets, yeah, only prices being negotiated as casino capitalism. So they were already speculative, and soybean expansion followed them. They are linked. They are determined by future markets. After the prices started to fall, land prices didn't. So we can see here, yeah, for the last 10 years in Brazil, this is from 2016, farmland had the highest increase in price because these investors, huge financial investors, kept investing in land as a financial asset on itself, earning profits with the difference of the price of land, even if commodity prices were falling. So somehow in the economic language, we would say that these prices are detaching from their fundamentals somehow. What means that this is a sort of economic bubble going on there with land. Yeah. Here we can see prices of land climbing or going higher on the last years in the region of Tocantins, Piauí, Maranhão, and Bahia. I'm not going to enter on all these graphs. It's interesting to grab one specific enterprise here that has a rural real estate company there, a joint venture between soybean producer that has land on the region and a financial investor, huge investment funds, and they have bigger earnings with land than with soybean on these last years. So the search for land as a financial asset, the target for land is driving its prices higher as an asset on itself, even if they don't produce anything there. Let me choose something better to show you. To show and to talk a little bit more about the impact of it instead of talking for you more about financialization and digitalization process, because my partners, colleagues have already talked about that. So why is so interesting for them to invest in land as financial asset on that region? It's important to understand that to create a new farm on that region is very cheap. They contract 2 tractors and 1 big chain, just like that, and they deforest all the Cerrado area, and we have a new farm out of nothing. So it's very cheap to achieve it, and the returns are very, very high. So that's why lots of investors are running to this place and to this sort of investment. This is a Cerrado area recently deforested, as you can see. Being mechanized production after all. And the deforestation on this area in the last 15 years, more or less. Yeah. So here we have this satellite photo, 2000 in South Maranhão and South Piauí region. 2008, 2016. This is a dried up river there. So what about social and environmental impacts? Social impacts, I talked a little bit already, but they are extreme, because land grabbers, they threaten and they use violence to expose communities from their lands. And these communities, they are living in worse and worse conditions because of this process. Sometimes they are hired to open the farms to deforest the Cerrado area where they use it to live and to use it, and in conditions of, as we call it, analogous to enslavement conditions, through a very short period of time, 3-4 months, and they are fired. They don't have labor anymore. At the same time, this soybean production in the high plateaus, where the rivers spring, they are drying up the rivers. So these communities where they live in the lowlands, we can see in this photograph here. Here are high plateaus, and here we have the rivers. They run from the high plateaus to the valleys, and the communities are located on these valleys. So the water is contaminated by agrotoxics. They can't not anymore use the water. They can't fish. Also, the soybean producers, they use agrotoxics to track their harvests, their crops. So the rivers are also contaminated by these herbicides and agrotoxics. And the communities can't live anymore, even in the lowlands. And the situation there is terrible. We've been working with them for a while, and we have a huge campaign dealing with it in Brazil, in the US, and here also in Europe, because of this process going on there. Only for me to finish here. I'd like to highlight. I'd like to highlight some points that relates this financialization process and this investments in lands as a financial asset with the topic of digitalization and of dematerialization. Okay, it's important also to think that Brazilian government trying to, as they say, regularize land in Brazil. They create 2 digital platforms for landowners and landlords to try to certify their lands. These are being used to grab land. That's the reality. Because these lands where these communities live, they don't have the titles of the land, even though they have the right of tenure for these lands. And these landowners, these landlords, these financial investors, they can register the land that they buy on the market in these systems, and nobody will verify it, because, and if they verify, they will not find that the communities are on the land, because they don't have the registers, they don't have the titles. So they can use this certification, the big owners, to borrow, for example, money in the banks, and to start deforestation, to start soybean production, even if they are over occupied lands. Yeah, on the last years, I'm finishing it. Okay, only to finish it. On the last years, some laws are. Some deputies and senators, they are trying to change the laws. They are transforming, they are shifting land and land titles into financial titles that can be exchanged. They can negotiate these titles in secondary land markets in the financial system. So this process altogether are turning land in much more easier to commercialize, so to speculate with it. We would call it that land from a how can I say that in a clear way? Let me think about it. Land is going to be dematerialized exactly somehow, because you will have a title and you can exchange it and bet on the price of that title, even if it is detached from the land from the materiality of the land itself. Yeah, it's very new, and it's happening, and it's going to make make deeper this process that we are talking about there on that region. Also, if we relate it with the trends in financial markets nowadays, with algorithms and with robots betting on derivative markets and on commodity markets, commodity future markets, we have a tragic and somehow apocalyptic scenario. Yeah, because as my colleagues were saying before, the loss of control of all this process, with robots betting in prices and end prices nowadays, they are going to, it's very difficult to imagine what's going to happen, because what's happening now it's already tragical. Yeah, and the trend is to make it deeper. That's how I would like to finish the presentation, and I will be glad to answer more questions about this process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fabio, for your presentation on how you said on this issue that, looks a bit where the future looks a bit apocalyptic. Unfortunately, that's why actually we thought it was important to have this issue, to try to understand better these very complex topics, because it is a narrative and it's processes that we need to be dealing with and understanding. So now we have had all 3 speakers, so we can open the floor for your comments, for your questions, also for other speakers if they want to complement I think if my colleague Vilma is also there, we can together, still there, we can together, I haven't seen concrete content questions yet. Yes, but as we mentioned before, you can raise your little hand and then you can also speak. I see Eduardo Ferretti. I have unmuted you, Eduardo, so if you would like to introduce yourself briefly and then ask your question or make your comment. Eduardo, I think maybe you need to unmute your own microphone. Sometimes that happens. It's this little microphone icon that is on the top left. You should be able to speak. Or we lost. Okay. We can't hear you, Eduardo. But okay, we'll check then if there's further comments or questions. Okay, I see a question here in the chat from Theresa Devasayam. Theresa, if you would also like to speak, you're welcome to do so. You just need to raise your little hand and I can unmute you and you can ask the question. But for now, I will read it for the speakers. It says, I am Theresa Devasahayam from Singapore. Thank you for those excellent discussions on a very important shift in the food system and processes in the world. I am wondering where the gender dimension is in all of these shifts, whether at the local, regional, or global levels as food producers or consumers, especially since women's identity is intrinsically bound up with food. Thank you. And you're welcome. Well, maybe we can gather other questions if there any. No, I think this is the main one for the time being. So we can, Stefano, Pat, Fabio, I can unmute you all and then you can intervene if you like. You should be able to speak. And then there's a further question that perhaps also Fabio can answer. In theory, yeah, if you unmute yourselves, you can intervene, the speakers. There's a further question, whether there's a database on the extent of land grabs on a global level. In the meantime, while the speakers unmute themselves, just to mention that the case that Fabio presented, the Matopiva case, there's a new report that has come out very recently on this issue. So we can also share the link here in the chat, so you can access this very extensive report that's dealing more with a specific area, but I think that might be of interest as well. Thank you. Fabio has shared the hyperlink in the chat. Does any of the speaker want to answer this question on gender?
Okay. Yeah, I would talk about the database. I shared here 2 links. The first one is for FIAN and Network for Social Justice and Human Rights last report on this region I was talking about, and the second one also has the support of FIAN, and it was released this year in February, and this talks about better also of the theoretical issues that background this process there. So it describes the process and the theoretical background to grasp this process. And the first report has more to do with social and environmental impacts on that region. About a database, there are some different research on that. I would recommend two main NGOs that have websites working on this topic. The database on land grabbing around the world nowadays, they are Land Matrix and Grain. You can find their research on these topics, and it's very difficult to grasp this process because, of course, they are illegal. Yeah. So there are different ways to try to measure it, even if they also grasp legal acquisitions of land. Both happen, and it's difficult to measure, but they try it. And the main point here is that after 2008, it's very clear that this process increased deeply. Yeah, so this process I was describing in Brazil is happening worldwide. It's spread worldwide. And there is a theoretical from Columbia University called Saskia Sassin. She dialogues with both datas, or better data, and also she has a recent book called Expulsions, where she theorizes about this process as the creation of global land market. That's very new. This sort of enterprises I was talking about never existed before. This sort of joint ventures to create these giant land, rural land investors, specialized on doing only that. Yeah. And it has to do with this tendency in land markets nowadays. About gender and patriarchy issue, yeah, very quickly here. This is a major issue. The impacts of this process in women are huge and extreme, because when they have to leave, for example, their land, and there is no wage labor for them, they have to sell themselves as overexploited laborers. They must, as the only possibilities to survive, to become prostitutes, or to become housekeeper. In some places, to live in the favelas of the peripheries of the cities close by this region, to migrate inside Brazil. And yeah, the consequences are terrible, actually, and for men also, but as we know, the impacts are different over both genders. Yeah, I don't know, I can give the floor for the other speakers as well.
Thank you, Fabio. If the others do, oops, sorry. Yes, go ahead, please.
Go ahead, Pat.
It's an excellent